Picture like a 15-year-old kid in the late 1970s. He has a shaved head, he is running away from home, and he is literally sleeping on wooden park benches in Washington Square Park.
Right, with absolutely no money.
Exactly. No money, no formal art training past high school, and just completely disconnected from any traditional path to success. But then you fast forward just a few decades.
And it is a completely different world.
It really is. A single painting by that exact same person is sitting on an easel at Sotheby's. The gavel comes down and it sells to a billionaire for $110.5 million.
Which is just, I mean, that trajectory breaks every established rule of cultural history. It essentially forces you to rethink how value is even created in the art market.
Right. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are pulling from a comprehensive biographical and historical text today, examining the life, the physical artistry, and the massive legacy of American artist Jean-Michel Basquiat.
And our goal here is to really shortcut you to being deeply informed on his actual mechanics as an artist.
Hmm.
Because, there is just a lot of hype out there.
Oh, definitely. We want to look past that hype to understand how he bridged the gap between street graffiti and high art, and what his explosive career really reveals about identity, commodities, and the unregulated machinery of the 1980s art market.
Right, how that whole ecosystem actually functioned.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the million-dollar canvases, we really have to rewind to 1960s Brooklyn, long before the gallery openings.
Yeah, we have to look at the foundation of his visual language. And that actually stems from a very specific physical trauma.
Wait, what happened?
Well, in 1968, when he was just 7 years old, he was playing in the street and was hit by a car.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he suffered massive internal injuries. He actually had to have his spleen removed.
That is a terrifying brush with mortality for, like, a second grader.
It really is.
Yeah.
And while he was recovering in the hospital, his mother gave him a gift to keep him occupied. She brought him a copy of the famous medical textbook, Gray's Anatomy.
A medical textbook for a 7-year-old. That is intense.
Yeah, but I mean, for a kid whose own body had just been violently broken open, looking at these detailed diagrams of organs and bones was completely revelatory. It became a lifelong influence.
So he basically stops seeing the human form as this solid surface.
Exactly. He begins to view the body as a fragile system that can be dismantled. That is why his later masterpieces are just flooded with exposed organs and skeletal structures. He is always trying to look underneath the skin.
That makes so much sense. And, that desire to peel back the surface eventually turns outward towards society itself. By his teenage years, he is rebelling against basically every institution.
Right, he famously drops out of an alternative high school after literally pushing a pie into his principal's face.
Which is wild. But his rebellion wasn't just aimless vandalism. Looking at the source material, he was essentially running a modern, viral guerrilla marketing campaign before the internet even existed.
Oh, you're talking about the SAMO campaign.
Yeah, he and his friend Al Diaz create this graffiti alter ego called SAMO, which stood for same old shit.
Right, but they weren't doing what other graffiti artists were doing in the Bronx or Brooklyn at the time.
Exactly. They weren't painting giant, colorful bubble letters on subway cars. They were writing stark, poetic slogans. Phrases like, SAMO as an alternative to God.
And stamping them with a literal copyright symbol.
Yes. By doing that, they were manipulating the physical algorithm of 1980s New York. They intentionally targeted lower Manhattan, specifically Soho.
Which was the absolute epicenter of the predominantly white, affluent art gallery scene. What's fascinating here is how early this shows his understanding of corporate commodity structures.
Because he didn't wait to be discovered in Brooklyn. He put his manifesto on their literal doorstep.
Exactly. He forced the people who bought and sold culture to confront his philosophy every single time they went out to lunch. He positioned SAMO as a world-weary critic while still just a teenager.
It is brilliant branding. But, you read the standard mythology, and it usually paints him as this raw, naive outsider who just magically stumbled into a gallery.
Right, the whole street urchin who gets discovered by benevolent art dealers trope.
Yeah, but looking closely at the historical record provided in our sources, that narrative completely falls apart. He seems like a highly calculated insider playing the networking game better than anyone.
I would absolutely agree with that. The historical record definitely complicates the romantic myth. He had an unbelievable, unrelenting hustle.
Like the Andy Warhol story.
Oh, yes. So Basquiat was making these punk-inspired, color Xeroxed postcards and selling them on the street for $1. One day, he spots Andy Warhol having lunch at a Soho restaurant.
And Warhol is basically the undisputed king of the global art scene at this point.
Right, and he is having lunch with Henry Geldzahler,
Yeah.
who is a very prominent museum curator.
Mhm.
And Basquiat just walks right into the restaurant.
The audacity. He interrupts their lunch and sells Warhol a postcard titled "Stupid Games, Bad Ideas."
It is incredible. And that hustle quickly translates into actual sales. I mean,
Yeah.
he sells his first real painting to Debbie Harry from Blondie for $200.
And then the timeline just compresses into a total blur.
Right, the velocity is staggering. By 1981, René Ricard writes a piece in Art Forum magazine called The Radiant Child. It essentially crowns him the next genius of the art world.
And he becomes the youngest artist ever included in Documenta in Germany at age 21. Then the Whitney Biennial at 22.
Exactly. But to really understand why the establishment was so hungry for him, you have to look at the market shift in the early 80s.
Right, they were moving away from minimalism.
Yeah, the 70s were all about cold intellectual works. Blank white squares, geometric metal boxes.
Yeah.
But the new Wall Street collectors in the 80s wanted something visceral. They wanted big, messy, emotional paintings. Neo-expressionism.
And Basquiat arrives at the exact perfect moment with the raw, chaotic energy of the street.
He brings it to the canvas, but also to his persona. And he forms the noise rock band Grey. He dates Madonna before she's famous. He's hanging out with Warhol.
But there is a deep duality there, because by his mid-20s, he is making well over $1 million a year.
Right. Dealers are handing him paper bags filled with $40,000 in cash.
Yeah, and he would buy these incredibly expensive Armani suits, wear them while he painted, and completely destroy them with splatters. Then he'd wear those ruined suits out to fancy gallery dinners.
It is a physical manifestation of his complicated relationship with wealth and status. He craved the access, but he also felt an intense need to mock the commodity structure he was starring in.
So let's talk about the actual canvases. If you're standing in front of one, what are you physically looking at?
Well, he was highly physical with his materials. He heavily utilized oil sticks, which are basically like thick crayons made of oil paint. It allows for a very aggressive drawing-like application.
And he painted on basically everything, right? Not just traditional canvases.
Yeah, especially early on. Discarded wooden doors, old refrigerators, window frames, even tires. He was literally dragging the physical architecture of the city into the pristine white cube of the gallery.
The sources point out these massive dichotomies in his compositions, too. Wealth versus poverty, integration versus segregation.
And a very dense visual vocabulary of recurring motifs.
Like the three-peaked crown, which is probably his most famous global trademark. What is the specific mechanism behind that?
To understand the crown, you have to look at how he was actively subverting European art history. Classical Western art used the golden halo for saints and figures of reverence.
Okay, so he is basically stealing that visual code.
Exactly. He flattens the halo into a jagged three-peach crown. His friend Francesco Clemente noted it represented three royal lineages: the poet, the musician, and the boxing champion.
So he is taking Black historical figures like Charlie Parker or Sugar Ray Robinson and crowning them.
Yes, he was forcing wealthy, predominantly white collectors to literally buy into Black royalty and Black excellence.
That is brilliant. And contrasting that is the skull motif, which ties back to Grey's Anatomy. But it isn't just biological.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sources highlight that the skull operates on multiple layers. It honors his father's Haitian heritage by leading to Vodou.
And it represents the historical trauma of the Black experience too, right?
Yes. The provided text analyzes his work as an acute political interrogation of colonialism and systemic racism. We are impartially reporting the text's analysis here, but it points to works like Irony of Negro Policemen,
which critiques how marginalized groups can be utilized to enforce the very rules that oppress them.
Exactly. And there's another piece, Defacement, painted specifically after the death of Michael Stewart. He was a young Black artist beaten by transit police in 1983.
Because Basquiat realized that despite his money and Armani suits to the outside world, he could easily have been Michael Stewart.
The canvases became processing grounds for that vulnerability. And the way he processed these themes linguistically is just as brilliant. He wrote extensively on his canvases.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because he didn't just write words. He would intentionally cross them out with a harsh line of paint.
Right. When interviewers asked him why, he said he crossed them out specifically so people would read them.
He understood human psychology perfectly. If a word is obscured or hidden, we just naturally lean in closer to try and decipher it.
He is basically trapping the viewer in a state of active deciphering. He is forcing them to engage in the labor of understanding.
But all of this, the intense intellectual pressure, the crushing reality of global fame, it eventually starts taking a really heavy toll.
The transition into his final years is marked by a profound, growing isolation.
I mean, imagine achieving your absolute wildest dreams by age 21, but finding out the reality is incredibly isolating. It is a harsh, cautionary tale about the velocity of success.
It really is. And what gave was his health, fueled by intense drug use. The biographies in our source material suggest this wasn't just rock star partying, it was a desperate coping mechanism.
Coping with a highly exploitative industry,
Yeah.
right?
Dealers pushed him to paint constantly, sometimes in gallery basements, just to meet market demand. He was churning out masterpieces while dealing with the intense pressure of being a young black man at the pinnacle of a white-dominated field.
And the physical toll was severe. He actually blew a hole through his nasal septum from his cocaine habit.
And eventually, to come down from the manic energy of the stimulants, he transitioned to using heroin.
He did have a few anchors, though, especially Andy Warhol.
He did. Warhol was a mentor, a collaborator, and really a father figure to him. But when Warhol died unexpectedly in 1987, it was a devastating blow. It severed his strongest tie to stability.
The sources say that sent him into an even deeper spiral. Though he did try to get clean, right? Traveled to an isolated ranch in Maui.
He did attempt sobriety, but the machinery of addiction, much like the art market, was just too strong. He died of a heroin overdose in his Manhattan studio in August of 1988. He was only 27 years old.
It is just incredibly tragic.
This raises an important question, though. How much of his downfall was the inevitable result of the very art system that elevated him? In his eulogy, Keith Haring mourned the future masterpieces the world was cheated out of.
But he also acknowledged how much he actually produced in that short time.
Exactly. In exactly 10 years of professional work, he created roughly 1,500 drawings and 600 paintings. He compressed an entire career's worth of evolution into a single decade.
So he dies at 27. The man is gone. But the Basquiat commodity, the market for his work, takes on a completely unprecedented life of its own.
The post-death valuation is astronomical. We mentioned that $110.5 million sale at the very beginning.
Right, the Japanese billionaire Yusaku Maezawa buying the 1982 skull painting.
It became one of the most expensive paintings ever sold and the second highest price ever paid for an American artist at auction.
But with individual pieces of canvas trading hands for the GDP of a small island, the temptation for fraud must be insane. The sources talk about a huge scandal with fakes, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Rampant forgeries. Because his style utilizes crude materials, some forgers mistakenly think it's easy to replicate. The most prominent scandal involves the Orlando Museum of Art.
Oh, right, the cardboard paintings.
Yeah, they mounted an exhibition of 25 works on cardboard, claiming they were undiscovered Basquiats found in the Los Angeles storage unit.
But the FBI actually raided the museum while the exhibition was still on the walls.
Yes, they seized all 25 pieces. It turned out an auctioneer had confessed to creating them himself in his garage.
And the way he got caught is amazing. The FedEx shipping labels printed on the back of the cardboard didn't match the typography FedEx was actually using in the 1980s.
It perfectly highlights how desperate the market is to unearth just one more piece of his legacy. And that desperation extends far beyond auction houses.
Oh, everywhere. His legacy has deeply permeated global fashion. You can walk into a Uniqlo right now and buy a t-shirt with his artwork on it.
High fashion embraced him too. He modeled for Comme des Garçons back in the 80s. But that commercialization sometimes creates real friction with his original intent.
Like that Tiffany and Company campaign from a few years ago with Beyoncé and Jay-Z.
Right. They prominently displayed a rarely seen Basquiat painting called Equals Pie in the background, specifically because the light blue matched Tiffany's signature robin's egg blue branding.
And his surviving friends were furious. They publicly criticized the campaign, arguing that treating a radical anti-capitalist painting as a glorified backdrop for diamond jewelry was a gross misinterpretation of his ethos.
It was a massive tension.
So what does this all mean? The irony here is wild. You have a teenager who spray-painted SAMO as an alternative to God, specifically to critique the wealthy elite.
Right.
Today, he is the ultimate luxury commodity. His crowns are on high-end watches.
It is deeply ironic, yes, but you can also view it as the ultimate proof of his triumph. He successfully collapsed the boundary between high art and street culture.
Yeah.
He packaged the visual language of the marginalized so the establishment couldn't ignore it.
And it completely outlived him, even as it was swallowed up by the capitalist structures he originally mocked.
He literally changed the physical rules of what was allowed on a canvas.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material today. We have traced a remarkable journey. From a kid reading a medical textbook, to a graffiti poet manipulating the geography of New York, to a $100 million master.
It is a profound legacy. But before we go, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over. Basquiat built his empire in a purely physical, analog world. He manipulated geography. He handed physical postcards to Andy Warhol.
Right.
If a young Jean-Michel Basquiat were coming of age today, right now, armed with smartphones, infinite social media algorithms, and digital NFTs, would he conquer the internet the exact same way? Or would the relentless, overwhelming noise of the digital age drown out the radiant child?
That is a fascinating question to consider regarding how we discovered genius today. Thank you for exploring alongside us. Keep your eyes open, keep looking for the hidden codes and crossed out meanings in the world around you, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.